we look at the developments in Niger following that coup, with particular focus on the ability of the economic community of West African states to restore democracy and to arrest the spread of coups in the region. Jeggan Grey-Johnson from Open Society Foundation's Africa Governance Monitoring and Advocacy Project joins us now. Jeggan, good evening to you and welcome. Ecowas has a zero-tolerance policy on unconstitutional changes in government. But weighed against its abilities to enforce that, how would you rate its ability to influence the outcome that it wants in Niger right now?
Well, I mean, I think clearly we need to be very clear that ECOWAS is in a very unenviable position or situation now, because there's a standoff between governments that are, in my opinion, legal and not legitimate versus governments that are illegitimate, legitimate but illegal. Simply put, we now have a standoff between civilian strongmen versus military strongmen. And, between the two, it seems as if that particular bloc that is consolidating power right now is the one that is wearing military fatigues that are armed to the teeth. So clearly, it's a dangerous situation, and ECOWAS has to basically tread very carefully as they move forward with this. It's clear also that they're finding it difficult, first, to engage the junta in talks, but then secondly, in my opinion, the threat of military intervention was very premature, and they're finding it difficult to walk this back.
I'm hoping we can circle back to that one at the end to talk about what happens going forward. But you talk about the standoff between, legal but illegitimate governments and illegitimate, and you made a converse point around civilian strongmen versus military strongmen. I'd like for you to tease out the definitions of those for us quickly.
Well, I mean, I think clearly what we are seeing is that, especially on the youth factor. So the question that needs to be asked is, how, especially for the coup in Niger, it's the same in other countries as well, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea, whereby when the coup happened, there was very little condemnation from the national standpoint. In other words, they did not find any resistance from the civilian side of things. In fact, the youth especially supported these coups. So one has to ask the question why. Secondly, which we could get to, but I think secondly also, the fact that, the symptoms of the coup is what a lot of people are focusing on rather than looking at the causes. And the causes really have happened under the watchful eye of these civilian heads of state. In terms of, number one, ECOWAS as a regional bloc through the Commission was not able to at least stem the backsliding that was happening over a number of years in that particular region. When Alassane Ouattara decided to term elongate, none of his peers got together and try and stop him from doing that. He got away with it. Alpha Condé from Guinea-Conakry tried his luck through a very, very questionable referendum. He went on later to hold elections, which everyone said was a sham, including ECOWAS itself and other international bodies. And eventually he was also couped. So in terms of hollowing out, number one, the Commission itself and basically disempowering it to act, to be able to actually enforce the normative frameworks and the shared values that ECOWAS as a bloc has basically committed to stand by, and to see those things, obliterated by, current heads of state in some instances and others that have been couped, I think obviously gave an opportunistic opening for an alternative to come in. It's not the best alternative, but in many people's eyes, particularly citizens of this particular country, it's a chance that they're willing to take.
Jeggan, three things I want to ask you, but I literally have 120 seconds. So let's quickly jump into this, which I think you touched on now. Could this be, or is this an important opportunity for ECOWAS to build credibility when we compare its response, similar events in neighboring countries in the Sahel, which you've just mentioned now?
ECOWAS has to build credibility. There are no two ways about that. They need to build trust within the 450 million citizens that belong to that regional bloc, many of whom are actually questioning the usefulness of an ECOWAS to, number one, protect them from rights abuses, protect them from elections, and also at least give the impetus to be able to create opportunities for job creation and a semblance of stability moving forward. So they have to build that credibility. That's the first thing. The second thing that they also need to do, which is important, whether they like it or not, at this point in time, as I've said, 1 in 5 West African citizens are living under military rule. And as I said, it's extremely difficult to now just basically use force to basically try and course correct. You cannot do that. It's impossible. That the standby forces that ECOWAS purportedly has are not ready for that kind of an intervention. The consequences will be catastrophic. So as a result, the only alternative that ECOWAS has at this point in time is to engage in dialogue, but not only with Niger, to engage with that as a collective. With these other 4 countries, or 3 countries in this case, excluding Niger, that are basically military regimes.
So you've answered the second question I wanted to ask. Let's end with this. Niger provides 7% of the world's uranium, but it's got amongst the lowest standards of living in the world. There are risks to its stability from Islamist forces. Bazoum has complained previously of disinformation about his government by people like, forces like Wagner, which, as we've seen on the African continent, has a pattern of exploiting mineral resources. As you look broader, Jeggan, who are the biggest beneficiaries of this coup and others in this region?
Well, it's too early to tell who the biggest beneficiaries are because it's extremely chaotic at this point in time. But what I can tell you, if this is not handled carefully, the biggest victims will be the Nigerian people themselves. Because, again, if it's through military intervention, it will be extremely destructive. It's not necessary. It's going to make people poorer. In terms of how they mitigate and negotiate, how they deal with their critical minerals as they move forward, that cannot be solved through military intervention. That is solved through good governance methods. That is solved through abiding by constitutional means, and that is solved by strengthening institutions. And all of these things are long-term projects as you move forward. So we need to build back. We need to build better. But at the same time, also, we need to cast our minds back on what motivated us from 1975 to come together as a regional community to say that we want to be governed well through all the protocols and the treaties that we've put together, primarily amongst which is the Protocol on Good Governance and Democracy.